See if you can still hear me okay. Does that change anything significantly?
Yeah. Let me get this away, and you don't have to yell.
Okay, good. Um, I think those of you who were here last week, I shared with you that I'm recovering from shingles. And the last thing I want is to catch something on top of that. So I'm being extra cautious. But if you can't hear, please let me know. So we're going to start this all again from the beginning. When I came in, there was a big thing on the screen that was entitled How to Engage an Audience, and I wondered if that was a hint. But we'll see how engaged we are. We are going to talk about parables this morning, which we started last week with Chava sharing first some of the Hebrew Bible parables and something about the rabbinic tradition of parable telling. And then I talked about how Jesus, who was Jewish, used the parable in his own teachings. And one of the things that we note is that there were two basic things or ways that Jesus used the parable. One is to answer the question, what is God like? And the other was, what is the reign of God, or the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of God, all of which mean the same thing. What is that like? And the nature of a parable is that it takes something that is basically indefinable, and it compares it to something that we are familiar with to give us some sense, what is it like, rather than being able to say this is what it is, because it's very difficult to put that into words. We instead use the parable to say, what is it like that we already know? So the parable is usually starts something that's like this, it's as if this, and so forth. So the parable teller answers the question, or attempts to, in a certain way, answer the question, what is this like? But then the listeners also have to answer questions. What is the point that the parable is making? Why is it important that we know this? How does or how will this understanding affect our future thinking or actions? So, as Nancy pointed out to me last week when I said that the mathematical definition of a parabola is something that is the arc that is created by something being thrown up into the air, and we don't know where it's going to land or how it's going to land or when it's going to land. But that's the nature of the parabola. We don't know that until after it has landed. And so that's what a parable does. It gets thrown out there, and then we wait to see where, when, how it's going to land on its listeners and what they're going to do about it. Okay? So, Jesus used basically two types of parable forms, and I hope that we can see by the end of today how valuable the parable form was for those within this time span that we're looking at parables, found the parable such a valuable teaching device. So there were two types that Jesus basically used. One was just a short type parable, maybe just a few sentences. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, it's like yeast, it's like a merchant. And these just are very short things that get thrown out there, and maybe there's a cumulative effect about it all. But then on the other side of things, there are also the parables that are complete stories. There are characters in them. They talk to each other or they talk to themselves. We get to know what sort of a character this is and why Jesus has used this character to explain something about the kingdom or about God. And we have some very familiar ones here that most people recognize by the title: the prodigal son, the good Samaritan, the talents, the sower, and the seed. Which brings me to the subject of titles for the parables. Now, we really have no evidence that there were titles to these when the rabbis and Jesus were telling these tales. They weren't saying, now I'm going to tell you the parable of the prodigal son, for instance. That title didn't exist. The story may have existed in some other form at some time, and when he started it, his listeners may have said, oh, I think I know what this is. But they wouldn't have known it by any particular title. And it wasn't until the 5th century even that manuscripts of the original manuscripts, which we're not even sure and we know whether they even exist, were generally written in a continuous script. There were no verse numbers, there were no chapters, there were no titles. All you saw was just a continuous narrative, and I'm going to show you a picture of that in a moment. But that wasn't until the 5th century that the trend started that, and probably more as just a reading aid, to put things into verses and chapters, so that particularly for people who were coming into Christianity hundreds of years after the beginning. So the names of the parables, which now you and I have inherited, have kind of unwittingly pushed us in a certain direction about how we're supposed to interpret this parable. But that's not even probably what their original purpose was, although it may have become that later. But the point is that we're not really supposed to worry about what the title says, but to recognize that there may be other points of emphasis beyond what the parable's title is kind of wanting us to look at. For instance, in the prodigal son, we hear the prodigal son, and probably one of the first things we think of, oh, this is a really feel-good story about a boy who goes bad and runs off and leaves home and becomes destitute, and then he decides, he comes to himself, he goes home, his father falls into his arms, and oh, wow, isn't this a great story? And that's where we want it to end, the happily ever after syndrome. But there are two other characters in this parable that are just as lost as the younger son was. And by focusing on just the one, we forget what the others are telling us. In fact, though we want the story to end with this party and everybody having a good time and happy that this guy's come back home, it ends with the father and the older son outside where the party's happening, and the father's trying to persuade the older brother to come in. And the thing is, that's where we're left. We don't know what the older son does. Does he ever reconcile with his older brother or younger brother? And what happens when the father dies and everything goes to the older son because the younger one's already gotten his? Does the older son then kick his brother out and say, you've had yours, get out of here? Or does he eventually forgive him, reconcile with him? Am I being too loud? Good. But does he forgive him? Does he say, let bygones be bygones? Okay?
Yeah.
Is it bearable? Oh, good. All right, so let's just look for a moment. This is a page from a 4th century manuscript of the New Testament, and this is just one page. It's pages and pages and pages that look exactly like this, with no breaks and no way of telling where to start or where to end. And that's what we had before we started having chapters and verses and titles of what this is what you can expect to read in the next page. So today, what I would like us to do is we're going to look at the parables. We're going to take the titles away. We're going to turn them upside down. We're going to look at cluster parables where the gospel authors took several parables that Jesus told and put them all together in one place. Maybe Jesus did tell them all at once, but if we examine this, we may see that the author of the gospel is trying to help us see what holds all this together. And we're going to listen to a parable about, I'm not going to tell you. You're going to figure out what it's about, all right? So let's just talk for a minute about clusters of parables. And this word pericope, which is from the Greek that means to cut something out of something larger. And it's could be from any book or what have you, but it's used particularly in the Bible in dealing with a pericope, or just a piece of something from one of the Gospels. We're told that we should always look at what comes just before it and what comes just after it that helps us know what it is in the center that we're supposed to be looking at and learning from. So we're going to look at a cluster from Matthew, and I'm just going to show you this little video, and we're not going to talk much about it, except that this is the first one in the group. And we'll talk about how it fits a little later on. Okay, so...
At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins or bridesmaids, who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 of them were wise. The foolish ones took their lamps, but did not take any oil with them. The wise, however, took oil in jars along with their lamps. The bridegroom was a long time in coming, and they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight, the cry went out, "Here's the bridegroom, come out and meet him." Then all the virgins woke up, they trimmed their lamps. But the foolish ones said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, our lamps are going out." "No, there may not be enough for both us and you. Instead, you go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves." But while they were on their way to buy the oil, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the others came also. "Sir, sir, open the door for us." But he replied, "I tell you the truth, I don't know you. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour."
Okay. So, that's parable number 1. Parable number 2 is going to be read to us by Rabbi Jim, and it's going to be up on the screen, but what I want us all to do is imagine that this group right here, we are all now in Jerusalem. It's somewhere around 30 in the Common Era. Maybe there's a few Greeks among us. We're disciples, we're shopkeepers, we're fishers, we're just a group that's gathered around that wants to hear. We've heard Jesus is a great storyteller. We want to hear what he has to say. So we've never heard this story before, or maybe we've heard a story like it, and we think, oh, yeah, I know what this is about, but we really don't. So let's imagine you're hearing it for the first time. If it helps you to close your eyes rather than look at what's on the screen, we're going to put it up there so Jim can read it for us. But if you want to just help yourself imagine that you're hearing it without any prior knowledge, just don't look at the screen. So, Jim, you're on. This is a parable about something. All right?
For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his servants and entrusted his property to them. To no one he gave 5 talents. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy servant. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy servant. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy servant, you knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow, and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with 10 talents. For to all who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless servant, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Thank you, Jim. So, let's do a little crowd survey here. You've just heard this parable for the first time, and we'll ask Rick, who will kind of be our man on the street gathering news. Raise your hand if you want to comment, and I'm going to ask you to just say in one word, you only get one word, what is this parable about? Okay, so let's go to Philip there. He's a disciple, but let's see what he says.
Vindictive.
Vindictive, all right. Let's go to Ruth there in the back. She's married to a disciple, and let's see, tell her all about Jesus. She's listening today. What's your one-word opinion?
Puzzling.
What is it?
Puzzling.
Puzzling. Okay. So we have two descriptions here. One says this parable is about vindictiveness. One says it's puzzling. Tama, what's your one word?
Fairness.
Fairness, did you say? Unfairness. All right. Dallas.
Rage.
Rage. All right. Anybody else? Let's get one or two more.
Faith. I think it's about faith.
About faith. All right. Let's hear from somebody over here. Rick. How about over here? Oh, here's another mic. Yeah.
Avarice.
Avarice.
Greed.
Greed. Okay. Jim, who read it, would like to say something. What is it about, Jim?
Free will.
Free will.
We have some volunteers over here.
I just want to say one thing, a word from the Pharisee who's attending.
Yeah.
And that is that next week we will hear the rabbinic parallel to this parable.
Super.
So come next week.
Okay. Well, let's see what we come up with and how it matches or doesn't match with what you have said. So we've had a lot of one-word impressions of this parable. And most of them seem rather negative. So I probably would think we wouldn't describe this as one of those feel-good parables, right? There's something about this that is jarring. It's uncomfortable. It leaves us puzzled. What are we supposed to think about this? So let's... here we go. I was a little surprised that nobody said money. This is a parable about money. I think that would have been my one-word impression, because a talent, even though over the years it's become kind of conflated with our definition of talent, which is some sort of natural giftedness that each of us has in varying degrees. That's not what it's about. It's about talent as a measure or a weight, actually, of money. And its worth is figured on what kind of metal it is and how heavy that metal is. And a talent in our own day now, the one that the third servant got, would be worth today close to $700,000. The second servant got something approximating $1.25 million. And the first guy got about $3.5 million. So, and after the master comes and settles accounts, the first two have already doubled what he had to begin with. So the master now has given back to him twice what he had. So let's look at this first paragraph for it, and let's just think now, just put that in the back of your mind. What is it? For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his servants, entrusted his property to them, gave them a varying amounts of money, and then he went away. So what do we know already about this man? Is he poor? No, we're looking at a rich man. Okay, we don't need to go all around the room. Let's just maybe just try to do this together. So we know that he's rich. Where am I going? Yeah, what do we know about him already? He's got a lot of money. And now he has a lot more money. By the end of the parable, he has a lot more money. So why give servants varying amounts of money to take care of, quote unquote, according to their ability, instead of just ordering them jointly to take care of the whole amount? He's going away, all right? So he's obviously thinking about what's going to happen with his money while he's gone. So he says, here, you take care of this, you take care of this, and you take care of this, according to their ability. What do you think the landowner seems to want each one to do? Why is he divvying it up like that? Maybe we don't know the answer to that. The parable doesn't tell us, at least not at first, what he's expecting. He's just given them this money. I'm going away, do something with it.
Well, doesn't it reflect varying degrees of trust?
Well, apparently it was not unusual for some wealthy person who could afford servants and what have you, if they went away, would entrust their servants with taking care of the property. So far, nothing's all that unusual, is it? Who's going to benefit from this? The landowner, right. Now, surely the servants have some expectation that if they do what he expects them to do, they're going to their life's going to be a little bit better too. But basically, who's getting all this? Okay, so he's looking out for number one, at least as far as we could see. So the two other servants, they do apparently what he expected them to do, and he's delighted, because they've doubled his money now. And now here's where the parable begins to become a parable, where the third one guy, he's not comfortable with this. Something's bothering him. And he says that he's fearful about. And so as a listener, maybe we're start thinking, well, what's different about him? Why is he uncomfortable with this when the other two weren't? And I've put there just for us to think about, he doesn't seem to be afraid of confronting his boss and telling him the truth about what he thinks the kind of man that he is. So he's not afraid where that's concerned. He's right up there telling the boss, he's telling him, there's something wrong here. I'm afraid of how your behavior. Or maybe he's not, because he's willing to confront him about something that's bothering him. So what is it that he's afraid of? What do you think he's afraid of?
Failure.
What is it?
Failure.
Failure. And what would happen if he failed?
Off with his head.
Well, there's that. I mean, he certainly does probably understand that something bad's going to happen to him. But what is he really afraid of? What's the underlying fear?
If I remember correctly, it was of blame.
Blame? But what? Let's go on to the next. The man in the parable is harsh and vindictive to the one who had the least. Okay? he takes from him even the little that he has, gives it to someone who is given 5 times more to begin with, and thinks that it's okay that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. I mean, isn't that basically what the end of the parable says? The rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer. And the landowner or the wealthy man doesn't see anything wrong with that. So can we think that maybe this third servant, how does he know that this boss is vindictive and harsh and takes things that he didn't own to begin with? How does he know that? Wayne.
It says so in the scriptures that you reap where you didn't plow and
Yeah.
harvest and so on.
He's seen it before.
Right,
He's seen this man do this before.
right.
I know what kind of man you are.
And
I've seen what you do.
Also, another way of looking at this is the parable of the talents, that we were given each abilities, and this poor servant who didn't use his talents was the one who was punished.
Yeah. So this is upside down, isn't it? Think about turning this upside down. First of all, the fact that he got the least, what is his master saying about him? I'm not sure I can trust you. I don't want to give you more because I don't think you know how to handle it. And so what is this poor third servant really afraid of? Exactly what happened, that he's going to lose even what little he was given. And he was afraid, so he was going to make sure that he didn't lose what he already had, but then he ends up losing it anyway because this is how his master behaves. So thinking about this as this group of people sitting around listening to Jesus tell this story, do you think that they would think that this man represents God in this parable? Does it sound like God?
Sounds like Pharisees.
Would anyone want a God like this?
Well, you might not want a God like that, but if you look around the world, it often looks like God is acting like that.
Yes, but
Over here.
it's the man that we're talking about, aren't we? Yes.
This whole parable goes to what I think sometimes about God and Catholicism. Like, everybody in this room has been given so many, many, many things. So it's very easy for you not to commit crimes or sins because of what you have. And yet the poor person who's living in the slums and has no money has to steal. I have a lot of questions, Pat. I'm giving it to Joe.
Well, this is the genius of parables, is that they land where they land. And we hear them according to where we are and how close it lands to us, or if it hits us right on the head or it falls on the ground beside us. Yes, Joe?
Well, we always want to see Jesus and God as loving and forgiving.
Yes.
But in fact, they make very strong demands on their followers.
Well, this is what I resonate with Ruth about. This is puzzling because when I grew up in the Christian community, I heard this parable many, 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 many times. And it was always the same message. If you mess up, you're out of here. So you better get cracking and use your talents, because otherwise you won't get into heaven. I mean, that, at least in the part of Christianity that I grew up, everything was about earning your way into heaven. And I would hear this parable, and it would scare me to death. You know, am I doing the right thing? Am I using my gifts the right way? Am I going to be found wanting at the end of the day and told you didn't make it? So I'm bringing all this up just because I want us to look at this upside down. That in fact, is Jesus showing us not what the kingdom of heaven is like right now, but what it has to deal with in order to keep a presence within what's actually going on.
Arlene
So
has
one more comment, then I want to go on so that we
I look at this totally upside down.
go ahead.
That God created this wonderful world for us and entrusted us to care for it, not take risks for material gain and damage this world, which is what has happened.
Well, actually, I think you're pretty right on there, Eileen, because let me just go on here and kind of show what is going on here. The third servant basically is saying to his boss, you're a crook, okay? You exploit the poor, you take what is theirs, and you make yourself richer, okay? Or you use your money in an unethical way to make yourself richer. And notice that the man does not dispute that. He says, I know that. You know that. So why aren't you cooperating with making me even richer? You're out of here. You're worthless. You didn't make me richer, so
You're sent into outer darkness, where
Outer
there's
darkness.
weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Oh, Matthew loves that phrase, weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, let me just show you how Luke tells it, which may give us a little more clue as to whatever this original story was, how Luke handled it. And I won't read the whole thing, but he says it's about this man who wanted to be king. He wants to be made king. So he's going away to wherever it is they make kings. And he gets 10 servants together. He gives them all the same amount of money. I don't know whether that's minus or minus, but that's the unit that we're told. But look at what Luke says already about this guy. But his subjects hated him and sent a delegation after him to say, we don't want this man to be king. All right? So Luke already tells us this man is no good. All right? But he was made king anyway. And he came back, and then he settled accounts with all these servants, and the first and second ones did what they did in the first parable. They made more money, and instead, what he says is, I'm going to give you 10 cities. So what's the deal doing here? He's giving them power, isn't he? Second guy, you get 5 cities. So then the other guy comes, and he does pretty much the same thing. I know you're a hard man. You take out what you didn't put in, and you reap what you did not sow. And what would you call that? If you planted a garden next door to me, and I went over some night and took all your crop, what do you call that? Stealing. Yeah, you're a thief. You're no good. And so the guy does what the other guy does, take his money away and give it to the one with the 10. And the people get on it right away. Wait a minute, he already has 10 minas or talents or whatever. Why are we giving him more? And he says, I tell you, everyone who has, more will be given, but for the one who has nothing, we're going to take away even that. And look how Luke brings it to the end. But these enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and kill them in front of me. Is this about the reign of God? But the other thing about parables is they really do not end. We don't know what happened to this third servant in the Matthew parable. He's been kicked out. He's now jobless, he's homeless, he's penniless. So what do we do with all this? There's a difference between the reign of God as it is fully realized and what it looks like right now. And what it looks like right now, if these parables are a clue, is that we're still in conflict with the kingdom of Herod. And if you remember Matthew's birth narrative, right after Jesus is born, here comes Herod. Okay? So already we've got the clash going on. Jesus comes onto the scene, this incarnation, as Christians believe, of the reign of God. And right away it's being challenged by the rule of Herod. So could Jesus be saying, this is what remember the word it? This is what it's like now. This is what we live with. We're trying to establish the reign of God, and this is what we're going to have to deal with. And what happens to those people who are victims of this clash? What happened to the third servant? We don't know. And maybe that's what we're supposed to. We're the ones that write the end of the story. When you're dealing with parables, it's the listener who decides what happens. Enter the parable of the sheep and the goats, which is the third one in this cluster. Tommy, you want to say something, please?
Yeah, I'm wondering if the rich man represents the Pharisees.
Well, I don't think we want to stereotype anybody, because they may have been listening too. Who knows? It's not about blaming somebody. It's about what is this that we're dealing with? What is it about the reign of God that we can see and not see right now? And as to what happens to the people who suffer from this clashing, we have this parable of the sheep and the goats. And let's start off by saying there's nothing wrong with goats. They aren't the bad guys. They're just different, But I think maybe Jesus used this format of separating because that's something everyone would have been familiar with. Shepherds often kept goats and sheep, and at certain times they would separate them, at other times they'd be together. And I did read that goats are a little harder to control, so they may need a little more attention than the sheep, but basically they are not intrinsically evil. It's just a metaphor, if you will, or an object lesson. And the king, and as we heard from Kava last week, when you hear the king, that's God. Unless it says the king of flesh and blood, and then that's not God. But the God will say to those, I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was a stranger, you welcomed me. I was naked, you clothed me. I was sick, you took care of me. I was in prison, you visited me. And the ones who did that say, wait a minute, when did that happen? I don't remember seeing you. And then he says, because you did it to the least, and who's the least in this parable that we just heard before? The guy who gets kicked out by those who consider him, he's not feeding the system. So he gets kicked out. And then there's the others who, okay, I was hungry, I was naked, I was in prison, I was sick, and you didn't do anything about it. Well, we didn't see you. How could we? And if you had done it even to this poor guy that just got kicked out of his job, you know, if you had done it for him, it would have been the same as if you had done it for the furtherance of the reign of God, for me. So here Matthew has these cluster. These are the titles we've given it: the parable of the wise and foolish bridesmaids, the parable of the talents, the parable of the sheep and goats. But I took the liberty, and if we have time, I'm going to let you maybe weigh in. I think I would call this first parable of the wise and foolish bridesmaids about the parable of the wake-up call. Wake up, look around you. Don't let the light go out. Shine it on these things that are going on, that are victimizing and marginalizing the people around you. Don't go to sleep. These kingdoms, the parable of the two kingdoms is what I think I'd like to call that talent parable. Keep alert to this constant clashing of these two kingdoms vying for the same space. And who's going to win in the end? Remember the wheat and the tares, where Jesus tells the story of the wheat being sown, and the enemy comes in the night and sows weeds there, and he says, just let them grow up together. It isn't time yet, but the time will come when we'll have to see who wins. And you're part of that. You're part of, you listeners, you're part of who eventually wins or loses. And then the parable, I call this the parable of looking out for the marginalized. All the people that suffer while this conflict is going on is where the attention, our attention goes. Keep the lights on, keep looking for the marginalized, and take care of them. That's my way of looking at this upside down, with a little help from Amy Jill Levine. So just time for a couple of comments. I will just kind of put this last slide up here and say that Jesus says the reign of God is like all this and even more. So, comments?
Pat, I think this is a wonderful example of how there are different images of God in the scriptures, and they often have historic antecedents. You have judgment and also mercy. The Matthew parable is an interesting example of that, and this is in Hebrew scripture too, that you are judged by your capacity for mercy. I mean, that's a prophetic tradition. It's also interesting, and I don't know whether you have any thoughts on this, the historical context for these. The early church, in terms of separating out who was a believer and who wasn't, especially in the face of persecution, where Christians often had been persecuted. The end of time, also the belief that Jesus was soon coming. So these things are shaped by historical perspectives, and it's hard for us sometimes to catch that. All we catch are the literal pieces of the story. But you have mercy, inclusion, and sometimes together with Matthew. Luke has these wonderful parables of mercy, the prodigal son, and then we have this vindictive, and it is hell, right? Hell exists in some of these parables implicitly, total rejection from the kingdom, from the mercy of God, So
well,
it's a
one
mixed
of the
bag.
things that I didn't read the whole parable from Luke, but at the beginning it said something to the effect that Jesus told this parable because people were expecting the reign of God to come immediately. And he's saying, it's not here yet in its totality. We've still got this going on. This is what I want you to pay attention to. Not what time the kingdom comes, but it's not here yet, and until it is, you can't stop thinking about what it is we really are having to deal with in the meantime. We have someone here in the back.
Well, we all know that there are parts of the church, of all religions, but with the evangelical movement, we're noticing more with Christianity to some extent that it is not considered to be particularly sinful to exploit your neighbors and to amass wealth on their behalf. And there's even a group of pastors, right, who proclaim that if you are rich, that shows that you are in fact entitled to the kingdom of God because that makes you successful. And I'm wondering if they actually rely on that parable to justify that point of view.
I didn't catch all you said, but one thing you said, if I can comment, that there is out there a sort of understanding that if you're doing right, if you're doing okay, that your reward is that you financially and practically are doing okay, and that if you're poor, that you must be doing something wrong. And I think these parables kind of turn that upside down. David?
I think the one of the issues that's running through this is faith is a risk-taking process.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to advance the kingdom, then you sit on your money or you bury it. So that the positive side is that the man who sat on his money refused to take the risk of faith and therefore was criticized.
Yes, he was risking exactly what happened to it by not participating in what everybody else was doing. That was his risk, wasn't it? And also standing up and saying truth to power and getting exactly what we might expect somebody to get if they do that. Okay, anything else? Over here, Jim, could you share your mic back here?
This is just a comment. I don't know whether or not it's true or not, but my recollection is that the audiences for Matthew and for Luke were different.
Exactly.
That Matthew was speaking to the Jews, Luke was speaking to the Greeks. Is that correct?
Well, probably basically non-Jewish. He himself, as far as we know, was not Jewish.
Right.
And maybe he felt he had to spell things out a little more to people who maybe weren't familiar with the parable form of teaching.
And they were written at different times,
Yeah.
I think, historically speaking. So.
Just behind you there.
There's one other really interesting historical reference in Luke's parable, because the kings that were ruling over that part of the world had to get permission from the Romans.
Yes.
And the idea that the king went away to get permission to get appointed king and the people hated him is a clear indication of how the oppressed Jewish community in Galilee and Judea actually felt about the Romans. So it's also, there's a political comment there.
Yes, exactly. And I meant to say that toward the beginning, that we, pretending to be a first century Jewish group of listeners, we're under oppression from Rome. And that's part of what we're bringing to this whole thing. Rick?
Doesn't it seem that the overall form and fabric of the parables is didactic to a fault, meaning that Jesus consistently never imposes on his followers or his listeners any view of him. Indeed, he consistently denies that he's the Messiah, even when asked, "Aren't you the Messiah?" "No, I ain't the Messiah." And then when what's his name, Pilate says, "Are you the King of the Jews?" he points back at Pilate and says, "Thou hast said it." So there's never, in his interlocutors, he never imposes on them an explicit message, but plants in their minds a problem to compute and to arrive at their own their own
Yes,
conclusion.
yes, and that's also quite something called Mark's secret, where he doesn't really come out and say specifically
Right.
that Jesus is the Messiah. So yes, this again to me reveals why the parable was such a handy teaching tool, because there was so much out there that people were dealing with and wondering, if you were Jewish, will the Messiah ever come and save us from this? When will it happen? What do we have to do to make it happen? And things like that. So I'm curious, I don't know whether Chava would comment on this at some point, why the parable as a teaching tool fell out of use. Do we have any
well, I mean, what I can say is that within Judaism, the parable remained a very popular literary form up to the present.
Uh-huh.
So
maybe the question is, why didn't the Christians?
So I mean, just want to say, they're famous Hasidic parables.
Mm-hmm.
So, which was in the 18th century, 19th century.
Mm-hmm. Jim,
I can say, I can explain
I
why it
think
fell
that-
out of.
I'm sorry.
The-
I think the parable contrasts two religions. The old religion represented by the one talent that was so hemmed in by rules and regulations, it did not share. It shared with no one. It was just, he was hemmed in. He was scared.
Yeah.
And his view of God, if it's the master, was awful. The other's view of God, the ones that invested their talents, was a more benevolent God.
Well, I hesitate to think that there are two different gods, and that the one in the Old Testament was cleaned up and made nicer by the New Testament. I don't think that really reflects the arc of God's work, that somehow being Jewish was bad, and then Jesus came to make it good. And I don't think that really would be acceptable, really. I think we want to think the whole thing, the whole thrust of Jesus' ministry was teaching people what the reign of God looks like. And if you're Jewish, if you're Greek, if you're a pagan, if whatever you are, there's only one kingdom that we really are meant to bring in, and that's the reign of God. And however you do that, this is God. You're doing the work of God by making the kingdom as visible here on earth as it is wherever heaven is.
You lost it. That's it.
I would just like to comment why parables, is that the right pronunciation, fell out of favor as a teaching tool, which this class tells me. There can be so many different interpretations of one stories that to me as a teaching tool makes no sense at all.
Well, I think that would be a course that might take a year or so to work out, but it is an interesting question why the Jewish tradition has continued to grow and learn through parables, and the Christian stopped.
All right. This total ignoramus and atheist is going to try to tell you what she thinks, and that is, my sense is that Judaism and the traditional Bible stuff is a religion that has been adding to its texts throughout its history. And so things can stay in use or go out of use or whatever, and there are one philosopher after another. A few things I remember about going to temple for the bar mitzvah thing was that they were usually referring to some, some longer period of time, and they were referring to current philosophers and whatever their interpretations, but so it wasn't a single text. I think what happened, to some extent, is the Old Testament the New Testament becomes the gospel. Mm-hmm. And it becomes the thing that everyone in Christianity studies and goes back to. And I don't think, Chava's going to surely correct me, but I don't think Judaism is that way. I think it just keeps building.
Well, if I can just close with a comment of my own, strictly speaking, we were all Jewish once. And the further that we've gotten away from those roots, we've lost something. Maybe we've gained something. But it feels as if once we moved away from the fact that we tried to look at this through the way we thought Jesus' original listeners would have heard it. And they would have heard it in just as many ways as we came up with this morning. But I'm thinking back to a time when, for the tradition I grew up in, there was no other way to look at it. It had already been decided what this meant. And that's why I feel a sense of loss. I can't tell you, working here with Chava over these 10 years, how enhanced my own journey has been by working back and forth and looking at these things, and what treasures have been opened for me because of this. And I hope the reverse may have been a little there too. But that's just where that question comes. Why then did the Christian tradition go forward and left any new ways of being Christian through this wonderful gift of parables that Jesus left us? So anyway, that's your parable. You write the ending, okay?